Hey, what's up everybody? Today we're gonna do a little wig wagging. I got a chunk of that vac stack from last time, about a 26 mil chunk, and I'm just necking down probably about a 4-inch section. And from that, I wanna pull that down and I don't know, roughly I think about 10 mil is what I was shooting for. And I wanna make 2 wigs here that will eventually be one of the larger parts in a beaker shape. So they're gonna be down towards the bottom of the beaker. So therefore I want them to be pretty good sized. Each ball probably, I don't know, roughly the size of a golf ball or something. So here I just pulled it down and I'm gonna split it right in the middle. I'm going for 2 lengths of tubing that are the same size. I want these balls to be the same size, so I'm just getting those handled up. And just for comfort's sake, I don't know, it just feels right in my hands. If I try to match my handle size with the size of the tubing that I'm gonna wig up, it gives me a little more control. You're gonna have to excuse my nasally voice. I have a bit of a cold. My son's in 1st grade and he likes to bring home a weekly sample platter of all the local sicknesses for me. So here I'm just pulling these down. These are, since I'm going for somewhat of a bigger wig ball here, these sections are probably about 6 inches long, something like that. And there you can see I got them pretty close to the same size. And that way I know that my 2 balls will be the same size. And then it's just starting to wig them up. I usually start on my punty side on the left and spin that up. That's just personal preference. There's a lot of ways to do wig wags or reversals or switchbacks or whatever you call them. This is just one way to do them. And I just use this pretty tight, pretty small flame and just heat up a section, maybe 4 millimeters wide, and just heat it up, pull it up. That's the wig, I guess. And then I let it cool, move down, heat up, that same amount, 4 or 5 millimeters, and pull it down. And that's the wag. And I'll do that and just work my way down the tube. I like to take my time. I like to wait for it to cool. Occasionally you'll see me blow on it to try to speed up that process. Because if you don't wait, you'll be dragging your last wig in with the one you're doing now, and the last one will become smaller. And when you do that, they eventually get off. As you work your way down the tube, you'll notice they're kind of lagging behind, and it just makes it more difficult. I like to keep everything even, keep all my tips straight. And that's what I'm focusing on, is the tips. You kind of choose a color when you're heating, whatever color rod stands out to you when it's hot, So sometimes the black is really obvious, or sometimes for instance, the steel wool in this, it's a little transparent. So that's what I'm focusing on when I'm lining up all the tips of my wigs. And here when I'm gathering back, again, I'm just focusing on the tips, just keeping them all lined up. That's really the main thing about a clean wig wag, is that when it's all brought back together, everything is uniform, all the tips line up, and that gives you a nice half and half pattern that you can then match them up to. Terminations can be tricky. Just to understand the basic concept of a termination is you're basically just trying to get the smallest piece of the tip of your tube the thinnest as possible, so that when it melts in, all those lines that are pulled together will kind of just heat and just go into themselves almost. It almost like kind of sucks in, makes a nice clean termination. So there's that one. Looking pretty nice. You can see all the tips are lined up. And I switch the axis on that, and I'm going to open it up and get it ready. There we go. So here we're going to do one, and that's going to show a little bit of real time, just to give you an idea of how long it does take to do these wigs, you know, and let them cool and move down. A lot of people will use a blow hose when gathering them back up. That's total personal preference. It's a great idea. For some reason, I just don't. I never got that comfortable with the blow hose with my wigs. I kind of enjoy the repetitive motion of going back and forth. I don't know. You want to use a nice small flame, obviously. The smaller your tubing, the smaller the wigs, the smaller your flame. I really enjoy wigs. I think they really teach you quite a bit about glass and how to kind of shove it around, how to kind of show it who's the boss. Because when you think about a wig wag, it's this tube with all sorts of different colors, which means different densities in there. Some colors are real buttery, some colors are real stiff. So you have to kind of fight that. And to think you can take a big piece of tubing, pull it down to the size of a pencil, twist it back and forth a bunch, you know, all these different densities, and then gather it back up in a completely controlled manner. It's difficult, you know, but it teaches you quite a bit about control and just taking your time and being patient. It's one of those things where the more time it takes you, I guarantee the nicer the end result will be. You use a nice small flame. That means nothing is going to get too hot and get squirrely and get weird on you. If you're losing control, that means you're using too much heat. You only need just enough heat to push that glass, to gather it just a little bit, give it a little puff, and move on down. The size of your tubing is pretty important. You really want to plan out what you're making for what section of the piece you're going for. If it's going to be part in a can that's going to be blown out, you're going to want to do a larger wig with more kicks in it, with more wig wags in it, because it's going to get stretched out. You have to plan for that. I guess the three factors of your tubing, of what size things are going to be, is, you know, not just the length of the tubing, but the diameter of the tubing and the wall thickness as well. You can pull your tubing down really small, but if it's super thick, you're still going to end up with a, you know, medium-sized ball. Or sometimes you can play with not just the width or the diameter of the tubing, but the thickness as well. Sometimes when doing minis, I'll pull the tubing down to, 3 or 4 mil and have it be pretty thin on purpose. So I know that when that thing is all gathered up, it's as small as I could make it. As with larger ones, if I need a nice big wig for a can section, or for, the bottom of a beaker that's going to be puffed way out or something like that, you want to use bigger tubing, you want to use thicker tubing, and you want to use longer sections. So it is beneficial to kind of plan ahead with your sections, make them the right size, proportionate to what you're trying to make. So here I'm just taking my time, gathering it up. I do several passes when I gather these wigs. Start with a smaller flame, do one pass across. Really, I only gain a couple millimeters in tubing size when I do that, but it allows me to stay 100% in control the whole time. So when I'm gathering, I'll put heat into it and I'll, push it together just a little bit. Right there, you can see I'm just pushing together, and then a little puff, and then I'll give another little push, and then move down to my next spot and do the same thing. It's that repetition that just slowly gathers that tube into a ball with all my tips lined up. Every once in a while, you'll see me hit that on the marver pad. That's because the fire side of this, all those colors are a little more buttery. They're not as dense as the grays, so every time I puff it out, that fire side will actually puff out a little bit more. So to combat that, I just hit that fire side on my marver pad real quick. It evens it back out. That can be an issue, especially when doing half clear or a half transparent color combo. You'll really have to learn to kind of fight your tubing when gathering it back up, because that less dense side is going to puff out more every time. So you can do little tricks where I'll kind of purposefully heat, half of the tubing a little bit more. Just give it an extra quarter of a second in the flame. That will allow it to puff out more even. Or just like I'm doing here, just hit it on your marver pad, cool down that side a little bit, bring it down, and it keeps everything pretty even. And I like to keep my handle on it almost till the end. That thing is almost a ball, and I still have my punny on there. And that's just so I remain in control the whole time. I could cut that punny off and just melt that thing back, but chances are things are gonna wander, especially the termination. I like to keep it in line up until I absolutely don't need to anymore, just to guarantee the straightness and the cleanliness of the tips of my wigs. Here I am melting off that handle, doing the termination there. So I got that off, and then just heat up the very tip and pull that stringer off. Sometimes it takes a lot longer than that. That one was pretty quick. It takes a little practice. I remember at first just being kind of confused by the whole concept of it. But just to think that you need to get the very smallest tip of that as thin as possible. That's the goal to a nice clean termination. And then also, after you pick that termination clean, you have to keep it thin. You don't want it to re-thicken up, because you'll basically just lose the work that you just did. So you want to keep it thin. You want to work it thin until it's puffed out, and then it can be thickened up. That kind of goes for wig wag or reversal work in general. You can't really work them cleanly really thick. All the lines will fold. They somewhat will implode into the clear. If you want to thicken them up, you kind of do it at the end. Once they're all stacked together and you're actually shaping your piece, that's when you can thicken them up. Okay, here we go. I just pop my hole off axis right in the middle of that gray fade, and then attach a little punny, and you can see there just getting the very tip, thin as I can, pulling off little tiny strings, trying to get it down to basically nothing on there. And that's that. And then I'll heat up just the tip. Geez, I wonder how many times I said just the tip in this. And then I just use a piece of 12 mil and puff into that to keep that termination nice and clean. So there you go. There are those two lined up, holes popped, ready to go. Like I was saying, you want things to be on the thinner than the thicker side, especially when attaching them. And you just get both lips hot and boom. And then I'll break off my cold seal, reattach it to the front, and then just go into that weld. And when doing this weld, you only need as much heat as you need. You don't want to super nuke this thing because you're really trying to be the lathe at this point. You just put all that time into keeping everything straight. Now you're attaching them both. If you twist it here, you know, you're gonna see it. So this is definitely a be the lathe moment. And I get it all the way till they're really lined up good, with my punny still attached, till it's basically a cylinder. That way I can still stay in control of everything. You know, I can watch them. If it starts to pull one way, I can just push it the other. And there we go. Two decent sized wig balls. There, I'm just straightening it a little bit, getting both of my terminations to line up perfect or close to it. And there we go. Two nice wig wag balls welded together, ready to be stacked up more into the base of a beaker. And there's a couple minis there. You can see you can really go, you know, as big or as small as you'd like. Thank you once again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time where we'll do a little more pattern work with this line tubing.